Hi guys, I'm Avalon.
And I'm Dominique.
And welcome back to another episode in our series of the Dark Tales of Halloween here on Dark Matter podcast. This week we're going to be discussing an infamous and honestly just bizarre case. I don't even know how to categorize it. I guess you could say it's true crime, but you'll see. It's just a very strange case. And some people even classify it as paranormal because, well, we'll get into why. So we're going to be talking about Elisa Lam and the unexplainable circumstances surrounding her death.
Right. And I feel like this is one of those cases where there isn't one general consensus about what actually happened. And there's so many crazy theories out there too. I don't really know what to believe.
Yeah.
And the case we're talking about is, again, of course, the mysterious death of Elisa Lam. Elisa Lam was a 21-year-old tourist from Vancouver, British Columbia in Canada. She was also a student of the University of Columbia and was visiting the West Coast by herself to take a break from school. She had arrived in LA on January 26, 2013 via Amtrak train from San Diego. And Elisa's parents were naturally a little worried, about her traveling by herself because she's a young woman in a foreign country, which definitely has its dangers. But Elisa promised them that she would contact them every day to let them know that she was okay.
Yeah, and I thought that this was a very interesting and important part of the case because for me, we're around that age and I don't think either of us would go on an international trip alone.
Yeah, usually, especially for us, people in their early 20s, we usually tend to travel with friends or family.
Exactly. Yeah, because she was going on a trip for the break or whatever it was. She was not in school at that point. So you'd think she would want to go with friends or, like you said, family. So I just thought it immediately struck me as weird because I have friends who go on trips alone all the time and that's normal for them. That's just not weird. But I was thinking, is this normal for her? And it seems to me that it wasn't because her parents were specifically worried about it. And parents are always going to be worried, but it just struck me as something's weird about it and almost I don't know how it ties in, but I just thought that was interesting that she was going on this trip all alone to another country.
Yeah, it is interesting because I know, like you mentioned, some people do like to go on trips by themselves and they're totally used to that. But her parents were so worried that they wanted her to call them every single day. So it could be that this was a one-off or the first time that she had traveled by herself too.
Yeah, that's true. We don't know. Maybe she would have started traveling a lot on her own and this was the first one and unfortunately it got cut short.
Right. However, on January 31st, the day Elisa was supposed to check out of the Cecil Hotel, her parents became worried when they didn't hear from her. They eventually called the Los Angeles Police Department and reported her missing. So the police searched the Cecil Hotel for Elisa, but found no sign of her. And they actually found surveillance footage of Elisa from the hotel's elevator, and this is the point where this case gets a little freaky.
Right, so the elevator footage is infamous. If you know anything about this case, you've probably seen this video. It's just super bizarre, and this is really where all the theories come into play.
Yeah.
Because without the footage, it would be weird enough, but with this, it raises so many questions. I mentioned this before, that this case is you answer one question, and that raises 5 other questions, and this is a perfect example of it. So we'll go over what actually happens in the footage. We'll also definitely have a link on the website so you can watch it yourself.
Yeah.
And the video is about 4 minutes long. And honestly, there's nothing that can be described as supernatural going on in it, but it just gives you super weird vibes if you watch it. There's not something that's unexplained in terms of physically, how could that happen? It's just unexplained in terms of her behavior is very odd. And you said it's creepy. It's really weird. You wouldn't want to watch this alone. It has just weird vibes going on.
Yeah, and also I think what adds to the fact is that we know that this is one of the last instances that you see her before she died.
Exactly, because if this was just a random video and the person was still alive, you could ask them about it, or it could just, it would be weird enough.
Right.
But just the fact that everything that happened, it just adds so much to it.
Yeah.
So in the beginning of the video, Elisa steps in the elevator and she pushes multiple buttons, kind of like when a kid gets in an elevator and they just press every
they
button.
light up the whole panel.
Yeah, she touched a few buttons, which already doesn't make sense because she wouldn't you want to just go to one place if you're getting on an elevator? But she basically then just keeps on stepping in and out of the elevator and she looks around a lot. She's checking her surroundings. And it gives you the feeling that she's avoiding someone, she's looking for someone, or she's even being pursued. Yeah. She looks almost cartoonishly. She'll turn the corner and look around as
almost
if
as if
she's being
pursued. that's why, like, even while we were watching this video, we were trying to interpret it and we couldn't even agree on what we saw.
Yeah.
Because in the beginning, I did think it was a little strange that the elevator took a little while to close, but this building is, you know, a little old, a little rundown, so that could definitely be part of it. But in the beginning, it almost seemed as if she had pushed these buttons and she was kind of waiting for the doors to close, but you know, if someone on the outside is pushing the button, it won't close. So it kind of seemed to me like she'd almost popped her head out to check, like, oh, is someone coming, or is someone had pushed the button and that's why it wasn't closing. But then she kept on doing that. Like, so that's something you mentioned, is that she repeatedly kept popping in and out.
Yeah, and like I said, it was the way she checked was not in a normal way, the way you or I would just kind of briefly look out. It was very erratic, her behavior, and it was very anxious. Like, it seemed very animated.
Yeah.
She was almost overacting in a way, or really feeling something.
Yeah, like you could tell through the video, she seems very distressed.
Right, and one thing I noticed is that, so she would like press several buttons almost in a way that if you were really scared and trying to get away from someone, I could imagine doing that, just pressing a bunch and being like, I don't care where I go, just get me out of here.
Right.
But then she would step outside, which, as we mentioned, she kept doing that. And obviously, if you're trying to get away from someone in an elevator, the last thing you want to do is step outside, because of course that's going to trigger the elevator to stay open, because it's you know, obviously based on like your if someone's walking in or out. So it just doesn't make sense, because it makes me think she wasn't trying to get away from someone, because why was she stepping in and out of it? But then again, if you're trying to get away from someone and you're really scared, you might do something like that not thinking. You know what I mean? Maybe she pressed the button and then went to check, and then she's like, oh shit, well now it's gonna stay open. Like, I don't know, it just, from the video, I can't tell what she was thinking, obviously, but I can't tell even what she was trying to accomplish. You know what I mean? Like you said, we couldn't agree on like what exactly she was feeling, if she was even anxious at all, or if it was all just her acting weird. I don't know. It's very odd. And you mentioned that at one point it seems like she's talking to someone, and that's
like
true.
you can sort of see her hands moving as if she's gesturing and having a conversation, which I thought was one of the creepiest parts.
Yeah, it wasn't, because we all have conversations to ourselves or whatever in our head, but this wasn't like that. This was like she was talking to someone. Like,
yeah, she was having a full-on conversation.
Yeah, but there was nobody in the video, so that's another part that's really creepy. And honestly, from just looking at the video, I had seen it years ago, but from rewatching it, I think the first thing that comes to my mind is that she's either on some kind of mind-altering substance, like any kind of like medication or drug, or suffering from a mental breakdown, or a combination of both. That's what came to my mind, because I can't imagine that's how someone would truly act if they were being pursued, like actually being pursued. If you or I were being chased by someone, we would not do that. Any of those things. So it almost made me feel like as if somebody was being chased in a dream. Someone said that, but also that it was like a dream, like it wasn't real how she was acting, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, her actions were very dreamlike. I agree. I think from the video, her actions are very confusing, but you can tell she does seem sort of manic, and it's almost as if she might be hallucinating these things. So that is one of the reasons. Is we'll get into her mental state and everything later, but one of the big things that I thought of was that she was in her early 20s. She was only 21, so that's actually the age that some people develop schizophrenia. So I was thinking, is it possible that she had an early onset schizophrenia, and that's why she seemed like she was talking to these people, or she believed that maybe someone was pursuing her?
Exactly, because I think the creepiest part of it is I think really what's weird about the video is that it's like she knows something we don't, or she sees something we don't, and that's what's really creepy. That makes me feel like she was hallucinating, like you're saying, because there's clearly nobody else in the video, and she's talking to people, she's running away from someone, but then she's like playing around the buttons, and so it's just very confusing. There's not a clear picture that comes from it, other than she was suffering from something, like something was going on. Right,
or at the very least she was impaired, because I would say maybe like people who are drunk would also kind of maybe act
I could
like
see
this.
Someone drunk doing that, definitely. Like, because drugs and alcohol affect people differently. Like, I could see someone drunk doing that. I could see someone even who had smoked too much weed doing that. So like, it could be so many different things that it's really not a clear picture painted from the video.
Right. And 2 weeks later, on February 19th, hotel guests made complaints about the low water pressure, as well as the tap water having a strange taste. The hotel sent maintenance workers to check at the water tanks on top of the roof, which is where they found Elisa's decomposing body floating in one of the tanks. Her clothes, watch, and room key were found in the water next to her, but her phone was never found. Once her autopsy reports were released, toxicology results showed that before her death, Elisa had taken a number of medical drugs, likely for her bipolar disorder and depression. However, there was no trace of any alcohol or any recreational drugs like weed or cocaine, anything like that at all.
Yeah, they couldn't find anything like that.
Yeah, but it is an important thing to note, though, that she was reportedly taking a whole cocktail of meds, including, sources say different medicines, but usually the general consensus is like antidepressants, some sort of maybe mood stabilizer or antipsychotic, something like that. And we don't have all the details with this, though, because they're only able to get a limited amount of blood samples. And like we mentioned, her body had been decomposing at this point. It never stated like how badly decomposed she was. So we don't know if her body was in the water tank for the entire 2 weeks that she had been missing, or if it had been placed there at a later date as well.
Yeah, that's like a big piece that's missing, because we don't know how bad her body was decomposed. Because one thing that we found when we were researching is that the guy who found her, the maintenance worker, didn't mention that she was naked. And that could be explained for so many reasons, because that's the least of the problems when you find a dead body. It's like, it's a dead body. But you mentioned also that it could be because like it was that badly decomposed that wasn't even, he didn't even notice that, because we don't know how badly it was. And so then
it would be hard to kind of
to rule anything.
Definitely.
But they did also, I feel like they said, I remember from the autopsy report, they said that there was no trauma or anything, and so it couldn't have been that badly decomposed, because they at least knew that, because you would think that if it was completely like she was just like basically disintegrated, they wouldn't be able to tell if there's trauma or not. But they were able to tell there was no trauma, there's this and that, but there's not a lot of details on that.
Yeah. And so her cause of death was labeled as drowning, and the circumstances were written down as an accident and then later changed to undetermined.
Yeah, literally on the report, I have the PDF of it and I'll link it on the website, but it has on June 15th, accident, and then June 18th, actually it's undetermined. Like they went back and changed it, because I guess the autopsy, the people who did the autopsy were just as confused as everyone else.
Right. I mean, I think there are a lot of details that are pretty murky in this case.
Yeah, for sure. All right, so I think this case is just a perfect storm, because there's so many weird things about it. And another one of those weird and just mysterious things is the location itself. So the Cecil Hotel has a very long and mysterious history, so we'll kind of get into that now. So the Cecil Hotel has a morbid past, and it's actually considered one of LA's most haunted hotels, which that kind of made me laugh. It's like, how many haunted hotels do we have?
I know.
But LA is a big area. And so the hotel was built in 1924 by a hotelier. I didn't know that was a thing. A person who makes hotels, I guess, named William Banks Hanner. And at the time, the area was booming with shopping boutiques, banks, and hotels popping up all around. Like, this was in downtown LA, so it was popping back then. It was like the place to be, I guess. And the Cecil was intended to be another posh hotel for businessmen and tourists to stay in. And it cost $1 million to build, and it was designed in the Beaux-Arts style and featured a marble lobby with stained glass windows and statues. So for its time, it was super bougie. Like it was.
Yeah, it was definitely intended to be for higher class citizens, I think.
Yeah, for sure. And that's crazy. It cost $1 million even back then, like 1920s. So I don't even know how much that would be nowadays. So this was definitely like a Beverly Hills hotel kind of situation. It was a very expensive area. At first, the hotel flourished. However, within 5 years of the hotel's opening, the Great Depression hit, which sucks. And the area surrounding the hotel became populated with more homeless people, and it came to be known as Skid Row. And if you know anything about LA, Skid Row is like
not the greatest area.
It's the diciest, basically the diciest area in LA.
Yeah.
And by the 1950s, the hotel had lost its shine, and it was known for being a place of ill repute. Like it's like not known.
Yeah.
Like bad reputation. Yeah. So the whole story of it reminded me, this is just a tangent, but it reminded me of the haunted, what is it called? The Disney ride you were talking about?
The Haunted Mansion?
Is it? No, not the haunted, the elevator ride.
Oh, Tower of Terror.
The Tower of Terror, because the whole story of that one is like it was this glamorous like hotel,
Hollywood hotel,
and then horrible things happened there, and it kind of went downhill. This one is different. It went downhill just because of the Great Depression, but it definitely reminded me of that. And so, but in addition to just going downhill because of money concerns, it also became infamous for violence and suicide that took place on its grounds, which not good.
Right.
So the first known suicide was in 1931, which is interesting because that's only not that long after it was built. It hadn't been around for that long. And a resident named W.K. Norton was found dead in his hotel room after ingesting poison capsules. That's very dramatic. And unfortunately, many more suicides would follow over the years. And possibly the strangest thing is that the Cecil was also associated with not one, but 2 serial killers.
So it's kind of like a magnet for just all this bad stuff.
Yeah, death, basically. And I've mentioned this before in episodes that LA was really like having a moment with serial killers for a while there.
Oh, they really were, yeah.
Like I feel like there's so many infamous serial killers that did their killings in LA during like, especially during like the 70s and 80s.
Or even just California in general.
California, yeah, like that was, I don't know why, like it was just the place to be if you're a serial killer.
Yeah, so Richard Ramirez, aka the Night Stalker, actually stayed on the 14th floor at the Cecil Hotel for several months in 1985. And if you aren't familiar with him, he was a serial killer who murdered about 38 people all throughout the state of California. So obviously a horrible guy, and he reportedly even dumped evidence of his crimes in the hotel's dumpsters.
That's crazy. He stayed there for months too. I didn't realize, like, if it was like a few days, it's like, that's a weird coincidence, but he basically lived there. Like, that's crazy.
And there was also another serial killer named Jack Unterweger, and his whole story is just completely ridiculous. So he committed his first crime in his home country of Austria, and he was actually even arrested and sent to jail for it. And by the way, this is where the story should end. Like, he should just be in jail, right? That's it. Yeah. But of course it isn't. And so a couple years later, he ends up writing a memoir called Purgatory or the Trip to Jail, a report of a guilty man, which somehow becomes a best-selling novel, and it actually manages to convince people that he is a changed man, you know, and that he apparently won't do this type of stuff anymore. And he then goes on to actually become a reporter, ironically enough, covering true crime cases.
How did he get out of jail, though? Like, they just let him out?
Okay, so here's the thing. I don't know if he had written the book in jail and the book had
helped him get out,
or if he had already been released from jail and then this book was like...
Well, other countries have very different laws about...
That's true, yeah.
I feel like life in jail is less of a thing in some places, so maybe he just got out, or maybe... Honestly, his book probably helped a lot. If he wrote it in jail, that was probably a big part of why he got out.
Right. But either way, this basically turned around his reputation and people are like, oh, he's reformed. He won't do this stuff anymore. That was not true. So, like I said, he eventually becomes a reporter and he starts covering true crime cases. And in 1991, he ends up traveling to LA to cover street crime in LA, and he stays at the Cecil Hotel. And at the same time, 3 sex workers were actually killed, and police immediately were able to tie him to the murders. And the most disturbing thing is that after looking deeper into, you know, his past and stuff, they were able to realize that he had actually committed many of the murders that he had actually reported on while he was a journalist.
Wait, I've heard of something like this. I wonder if it was somebody else, but I've heard of people doing this before. People will commit crimes and then like report on their own crimes, but not as confessing, just being like, oh, look at what happened. Like, and that's just crazy that he was literally a reporter. That was his job. Yeah. And he was reporting on the things that he did himself.
Dude, that's crazy.
How did he never slip up and say something, you know what I mean, that only the cops knew? He's the one reporting it.
I know.
Because, you know, sometimes they do that in confessions. They say something and they're like, well, nobody knows it. Or like, that's not confessions, like just interviews, you know?
Yeah.
So that's crazy that he never got caught up before that.
I mean, it's crazy to me. They just released him and he went on to commit the same murders.
That's so insane. And he stayed at this hotel too.
Yeah.
Of course he did.
Yeah, so I mean, that was the whole entire like reputation of the hotel, which obviously adds even more to Elisa Lam's mysterious death, like just the circumstances. And of course, this has bred a lot of theories online and with people within the true crime community. And I feel like the most common like theory, or at least the first thing that I thought of too as well, is that maybe someone had slipped her some sort of drugs. If it weren't for the autopsy, my immediate thought would have been like, oh, she's definitely on some sort of drug or something that affects her mental
behavior,
state. Yeah. And then another theory too is that she had actually stopped taking her medications because, again, she was on medications for bipolar and depression, which sometimes can have manic side effects.
So she was on a few medications.
Yeah, she
too,
was.
like more than one.
Yeah, and sometimes those, like, the balance of those medications can be delicate, and you have to take it the way that you were supposed to. So, I mean, it could be that she had either maybe taken too much or had mixed around sorts of medications, and which, you know, could have caused her to act that way.
Like I heard one thing, literally they're all different, so I'm not saying this is what happened at all, but one report said that she could have like taken stimulants and then not the stabilizers, which that makes sense, but like we don't know that. We really don't know that, but that's definitely a possibility here. But one thing I think about too is that her parents, although they were worried, they felt safe enough to let her go on the trip. They were just like, call us every day, we want to check in on you. Like, she was young, you know, like that makes sense. But I feel like she was functioning enough that they weren't like, okay, you need someone with you, because like
they allowed her to travel by herself.
Yeah, because they know her, you know what I mean? And I think that like if they thought she wasn't like adequately taking her medicine, or she wasn't going to be able to figure it out on her own, like they wouldn't let her go alone. So I think that she was obviously a very smart young woman. I think she like had her medicine in control, but I don't know, sometimes people do spontaneously stop taking it, I guess. I don't know. There's so many, it's like there's so many plausible things, but then there's not enough evidence for anything really.
Right. And that kind of leads into the next theory, is that she, you know, either had a mental breakdown / committed suicide, because again, we did mention that she did have bipolar disorder, she did have depression, and sometimes, you know, that does lead people to commit suicide. However, I do think that's unfair to immediately assume that that is what she decided to do just because she was on these medications. Because just because she's on them doesn't mean that she was prone to do that. A lot of people are on medication and they are able to handle their mental health pretty well. But I mean, that is a possibility that she had been thinking about this for a while and then decided to do it while she was in LA. And again, something that we mentioned before too is that another possibility that I thought of was the early onset schizophrenia, because like I said, she did have previous mental health problems, so I feel like that is a signal that she might be more vulnerable to other mental problems as well. And for anyone who's studied schizophrenia, you know it's a very serious disease. I mean,
it can come on strong.
It can come on very strong.
It just comes on out of nowhere, and I remember when I first found out about it, I was convinced I was going to get schizophrenia, because I was a psychology major. And when I learned about that, I was like, what do you mean one day it just comes on? Yeah. It's not like other illnesses. Literally, like in your early 20s usually is when it comes on, and it just like happens one day, and then you're schizophrenic. And obviously it's not like people make out schizophrenia to be this like thing that you're just a monster, or you're so weird, or you're doing crazy things. And like that's not always what it is. And many people live a normal life and they just take the medication for it. But it does happen randomly. And
it does.
And her behaviors definitely reminded me of schizophrenia, because it seemed like she was having some kind of delusions of, like they say, like delusions of grandeur, and the way that you think someone's chasing after you, or you think the government's after you when they're not.
Yeah, because you become very paranoid, essentially.
Yes, exactly.
And there was the other thing too of, it seemed like she was talking to someone. So if she did have schizophrenia and she was hallucinating someone, that would explain it.
Yeah, and that's a lot of times. I remember one professor explained to me that, like, if somebody just started talking in your head all the time, you would have to explain it somehow. So that's why a lot of times they're like, oh, the government's after me, or someone's after me. Yeah. I mean, that just makes sense. You know what I mean? Like, why is someone talking in my head?
Right, or someone's watching me.
Yeah, exactly. So I think that all kind of goes together with, like, this is schizophrenic behavior, but there's so many things that can trigger that kind of behavior. It doesn't have to be schizophrenia. So it's like every step forward with this case is a step backward too. It's because it's like it could literally be anything.
Yeah, I feel like we don't have enough evidence to prove one theory or another, which is why there's so much speculation surrounding this.
The body too, the way it was found, there's not enough there's not enough evidence. But one, like, some more, I guess, like morbid or darker theories, it's all dark. Yeah. But one is that she was possessed or haunted in some way. And so, because, again, it looked like she was talking to someone on the elevator when clearly nobody was there. So it's like, did she see someone? Was she, like, communicating with I don't know, with a ghost or something.
Right. And this hotel does have a reputation for violence, so
a lot of people died in the hotel.
Yeah, so it's not a stretch to say, like, oh, she was maybe being haunted by a ghost or something.
Yeah, and I feel like that kind of paints a different picture, too, that, like, she was kind of this, I don't want to say tormented soul, but she was obviously, like, she suffered through, you know, some, like, mental illness and things like that, and maybe the ghosts, like, just communicated with her because they were suffering, too. I don't know, but I think that's a theory, too, that she was talking to ghost or she was possessed, I guess. I mean, that's more of like a religious theory. Some people might think she was possessed, but it's possible. It definitely is. And one thing you mentioned was that the elevator doors wouldn't close for a long time.
Yeah.
I'm like, yeah, it could be an old hotel, but they did stay open for a while.
Good while. Yeah, like if I had gone into an elevator and pushed it and it wasn't closing, I would be like, okay, why isn't it closing? I would try to figure out what was wrong.
Yeah, and I don't know, that goes back to the footage because I remember like she kind of acted like that at first, like, okay, what's going on? Let me go check. But then she started just doing weird shit. Like she did stuff with like her hands and like, you know what I'm talking about? So it's like, it almost wasn't like she was scared at some points. I don't know, but yeah, she could have been possessed. It's totally possible, but I feel bad saying like, oh, she was possessed. Like she's passed away now. You know what I mean? Like I don't want to say anything bad about her, but she definitely could have been talking to some ghosts that we didn't see because that place is definitely haunted.
Yeah, well, one thing too that I don't know if you noticed, but you know, eventually she does get out of the elevator and she
like entirely,
she leaves. Yeah. So she gets off the elevator and she leaves, but the thing is, when she leaves, like after a while, the elevator doors do close, but then I'm assuming that the elevator kept rising because she had pressed all these buttons or going down wherever, but it was moving. So when it stopped on each floor, you could see the doors opening and closing, and they had opened and closed like it wasn't slow like the first time. I feel like it was operating normally now.
That's a good point. I didn't think about that. It definitely was slower at first.
Yeah.
So yeah, there could have been. That's interesting. Like, what if the elevator picked up that there was someone, but it was like a ghost?
Oh god, I don't know.
That's so creepy. Like, it actually has weight. I don't even know.
Yeah.
But that's definitely like it's hard not to turn to that for an explanation with this case because the natural world has no explanation for this. It's just beyond our knowledge. And the last theory is one that kind of coincides with the Cecil's reputation, which is murder. So the idea is that like she was running away from someone in the footage. That's why she was like acting all frantically. Like we said,
she was ducking in and out. She was kind of like hiding against the door.
Yeah, she definitely acted at some points, not throughout the whole thing, but at some points like she was trying to get away from someone.
Yeah,
so
she was either running away or trying to hide.
She definitely could be trying to get away from someone. And I think this also helps explain like her circumstances where she was found because for some reason it was really hard to find information on the tanks. I thought there would be more like solid information because they're literally just tanks, but I couldn't find a lot of specifics or like I found a lot of differing information, but it seems that the general consensus is that
she shouldn't have been able to get into the tank.
Yeah, she shouldn't have had the strength to open it up because I think they mentioned she was like 5'4". She was a pretty like skinny girl. I don't think I would have been able to open it. That thing is big, you know what I mean? So I think you have to like, it's probably one of those things that you have to like crank it, you know what I mean, and then open it up.
And from what I heard too, the water tanks were supposed to be locked. So they were supposed to be locked.
Get up there, right? Yeah. Like you can't even get up there to start with.
Yeah. So the thing is, if it was her, then how did she manage to do all these things by herself? And again, she was found naked with her clothes beside her. So if the theory is suicide, then you're postulating that she managed to climb up there on her own, unlock it, lift up that heavy lid, get in the water, and then take off her clothes.
And then close the lid, right? Because they didn't find it with it open.
I wasn't sure what they said, but I don't believe that it was open, no.
Maybe it was, like, maybe there wasn't the lock on it or something, right. But for sure, I think we don't know for sure, but I think it was closed because I feel like if it was open, they would have noticed it sooner. Somebody probably would have gone up there and been like, what the hell? You know, somebody works there. So there's just no explanation, like, how did she close it in on herself? And why did she take her clothes off? But then again, if she was murdered, why would they leave all of these pieces of evidence in the water with her? Like, you can't really, I don't think you can really find, like, fingerprints on something that's been in the water, but why would you even risk it? You know what I mean? Why would you even do that? And that also, murder might account for why they didn't find her phone. Yeah. Because her, I think it was her watch, her clothes, her key, everything was with her in the tank.
Except for her phone.
Except her phone, yeah. And that seems like I don't think she left the hotel and then came back and did all this.
Yeah, without her phone.
Yeah, so it seems that like it would be somewhere in the hotel, but one thing you mentioned is that somebody could have easily just taken it and not known it was evidence.
It could have been stolen, but to me that does seem like quite a big coincidence.
It definitely is. So there's just like really no good explanation for this case. There's so much back and forth that I've gone through, and I think you have gone through too with this case. It's like every explanation, it's also not like it's plausible and it's also not plausible at all.
Yeah, like it doesn't cover everything. And we mentioned this too, like that we don't really know what to think. I'm still one of those people that is very puzzled by this case. That's why we want to cover it. It's just so bizarre. And I've heard of this case for a couple years now, like way before we even want to start this podcast. And I've never been able to figure out what I thought. And if I had to choose, I guess I would say, I don't know, I feel like my mind wants to lean towards maybe someone was after her. I don't know. I can't get over the fact that she was found naked, like even if she was like hallucinating, like why would you take off your clothes, and how could you get up there by yourself?
Maybe like if she was hallucinating, maybe she was thinking like she was going for a swim, what I mean, like she was skinny dipping, but it's like
possible.
Like if she was hallucinating, all bets are off, but they didn't find anything in her system,
you
know what I mean, and they didn't, but then again, we don't know about medication. It's literally like it could be 1,000 anything. It could be so many. And honestly, when it comes to me, like what I believe happened, I genuinely don't know.
Yeah.
I don't even have an opinion.
Yeah.
It's kind of like the Dyatlov Pass, where
the
most probable one is the Yeti. You know what I mean? It's almost like the most probable theory is some kind of paranormal event, because there's just no explanation. So I have no theory here. I have no clue. I could go in any direction, but we'd love to hear what you guys think, because we are stumped.
Yeah, I mean, there's a reason why this is still an unsolved cold case. It's because no one can figure out, like, what exactly happened that would answer all these questions.
There's just too many questions. Yeah, I think that at the end of the day, there's too little evidence and too many questions.
Yeah, definitely.
I feel like, unfortunately, we might never know, but hopefully someday they find a crack in this case.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, it could happen. It's been happening recently that some cases have been solved, so yeah. But yeah, again, we would love to hear your thoughts, see what you guys think. But thank you for listening. And we actually have a special episode dropping on Halloween evening. Normally, we only do it on Monday. But yeah, make sure to stay tuned on Halloween for that special episode. And to make sure you don't miss any announcements, follow us on our Instagram at darkmatterpod and our Twitter at darkmatter_pod. And we'll put our full list of sources on our website at darkmatterpod.com.
Right, and if you're listening on Spotify, be sure to follow us. Or if you're listening on Apple Podcasts, it would be a huge help if you left us a review. Also, be sure to subscribe and like our video if you enjoyed watching. And if you like our podcast, we'd really appreciate it if you spread the word to your friends and family, because it really helps us grow. And we'll see you next week, or not even next week. We'll see you on Halloween. All right, thanks for listening.